I'm sorry. Okay, we're starting all over. Very sorry about that. Uh, I thanked everybody that needed to be thanked, and we'll get right into the talk. You didn't get to hear any of that, but you didn't really miss anything. This map shows the major boat building projects I've done in Japan. I've built boats with 9 craftspeople from South Japan, but tonight's talk is specifically about freshwater river boats. And so that makes this is the first time I've given this talk. So for those of you who have listened to me before, this should all be new material. At least this should be new boats. I will be repeating some things about Japanese apprenticeship and my work in Japan and so on. So without further ado, I'll just run quickly through the apprenticeships I did prior to finally studying riverboats. The tugboats of Sado Island in the Sea of Japan, seaweed gathering boat from Tokyo Bay. This is actually a water taxi from 18th and 19th century Tokyo. So I guess we could call this brackish water boat that I built with my teacher in Tokyo. This is a fishing boat from Aomori Prefecture in the far north. And for those who don't know it, Aomori Prefecture is Maine's sister state. So this would be, kind of simpatico with you folks here in Maine. Whoop. And the Sabani of Okinawa, very, very different from other Japanese boats. Okinawa is really a different culture than Japan, and their boat building and many, many other things reflect those differences. This is a small inshore fishing boat from, again, back in northern Japan, Iwate Prefecture. This project specifically I undertook because this is the region that was hit by the tsunami in 2011, and it's said that 90% of all boats were destroyed in the disaster. So I went and documented how these boats are built, working with the last builder of these boats. And I followed that up by building one myself at the Takenaka Carpentry Tools Museum in Kobe. So very same design. Now on to riverboats. So it took quite a while, over 20 years, 25 years of going to Japan before I finally got to build a riverboat. And it was this type. This is called an ukai bune, which means cormorant fishing boat. And these, this was actually a commercial method for fishing, fishing with birds, invented by the Chinese, and it has been done in Japan for at least 1,300 years. And this is in Gifu, which is on the Nigata River. This is pretty much the geographic center of the country in the mountains. And today, cormorant fishing is only conducted in about a dozen places around Japan, and it is all done solely for tourists. So it is no longer a commercial fishery. People who fish these waters commercially use nets, and there's a lot of sport fishing with rod and reel, but the cormorant fishing is mostly an entertainment at this point. But it took me 15 years to convince the last builder of these boats on the Nigata River to take me on as his apprentice. Again, this is a shot of a tourist boat. This is not in Gifu City, it's in the town of Seiki, which is just upriver. But what you do is you board the boats, often there'll be a dinner boat, and you go out and wait for the sun to set, and everybody expectantly watches upriver, and then what comes into view are the cormorant fishermen. And this is, again, this photograph is from Gifu. The Gifu fishermen are by far the most famous of the cormorant fishermen, and that is because This is the fisheries that the royal family watches on occasion. And the 6 fishermen in Gifu, it's a hereditary job. These men are descended from 8, 10, 12 generations of cormorant fishermen, and they maintain this tradition just impeccably. The boats, the costumes, all the methods of the fishery are literally unchanged for at least 200 or 300 years. So you see the bird in the foreground. All the birds are leashed. The leash restricts their necks so that they cannot swallow the largest fish. The smaller fish they pass on to their stomachs. But the fisherman, who's called an usho, he tends the leashes, and when the birds are full, their gullets are full, he brings the birds back aboard. You see a couple of birds sitting on the gunwale, and the fisherman tickles their throats, they regurgitate the fish, and birds go back in the water to keep fishing. The brazier is to attract the fish, which, by the way, is called the ayu, which is a delicacy in Japan. The English translation is sweet fish. It's a small fish with white flesh, very, very delicious, and is renowned throughout Japan and considered a delicacy. As I say, this goes back to China. This is a photograph from China of a cormorant fisherman on the Li River. And I visited him with a grant from the Asian Cultural Council in 2018 to kind of explore cormorant fishing in Japan and its origins in China. Right now, the Li River is a potential UNESCO heritage site. And to make that designation, the Chinese government has to improve the river quality, the water quality there. So actually, at the moment, no one is allowed to fish on the Li River. And so the cormorant fishermen, like this man, essentially stage this for show. And so people like me just get the opportunity to get up close to the fishermen and photograph them in the traditional costume. But hopefully within time, these fishermen will also go back to work actually fishing in the river with birds. So my teacher, building the cormorant boat in Gifu, one of the things that I found interesting is that I've met several dozen freshwater boat builders from throughout Japan in my research travels. Not one of them uses a drawing. And they rely solely on memorized dimensions and patterns. And this particular teacher of mine used these patterns. And he had one of these made for each type of boat he built. And I'll give it away a little bit later in the slideshow, but I'm not telling you right now. But you folks watching can ponder this. But I show this picture to sort of explain the background of my research. I happen to be the sole apprentice for 7 of my 9 teachers. And they worked from memory. Most of them didn't use drawings. And so this craft, which is absolutely dependent upon the apprentice system for its survival, is in real danger of disappearing. I might add that my teachers were all in their 70s and 80s at the time I worked with them. So with almost no apprentices, this is really in danger of dying out. And one reason for that is the complete lack of documentation. And again, to refer back to this slide, if you don't work alongside this craftsman, how would you ever figure out how these patterns are used and what they mean? And so this picture, in short, is emblematic of what I do. I work alongside the craftspeople, and I record everything that I can. The secrets, how the patterns are used, the secret dimensions, and the techniques. So, and I do promise to reveal what those patterns are for. My teacher in Gifu was unique in that he used these special chisels for piloting nail holes, And you'll notice a couple of his boat nails. These are square shank, blacksmith made boat nails. And this tool, he called a moji or momijiri in Japanese. This is a Chinese tool. This is an ancient Chinese tool. And apparently only the boat builders in two river valleys in Japan next to each other, the Kiso River and the Nagara River, are the only craftspeople in Japan that use this tool. If anybody knows differently, please let me know. And that reminds me, we had a little announcement to make, which is there are a number of videos that I'd like you to see, and there's a lot of follow-up resources I want to share with all of you. So if you're interested in receiving that, in the chat, please enter your email address. And we're not going to sell that to anybody, but I will follow up with you with some pretty interesting boat building videos and some other resources to understand this subject a little bit further. So put your email address in the chat, and then I'll get that, and I'll get those emails out to you at least by next week. So the way this tool is used is to drill a hole. You hit the back of the chisel, you insert a wooden handle, you hit the back of that chisel with a wooden mallet, couple of strong hits, and then you twist the chisel through a 180-degree arc 4 or 5 times, and then you repeat. And that's how you drill a hole for the nails. And this is Mark Bauer, a naval architect from California, who joined me on this project as both a volunteer boat builder and also to help me document the process and document these boats. These are some of our nails. Again, the square shank, and my teacher believed in pre-rusting them. We soaked these in brine at the start of the project, and he believed that a rusty nail held in the wood better than a fresh new nail. One of the techniques that's central to Japanese boat building is fitting all the parts of the boat by running a handsaw through the seams. Those of you who have seen my other presentations have heard me describe that. And then the last step, that running the saw back and forth slowly reconciles the unevenness between the planks and renders a very, very tight fit. And then the final technique to get a watertight fit is to use a round-faced hammer and pound that edge of the plank without touching the corners. And you can see from the square that there's a little dip. There's a depression made along the full length of that edge. And when two planks are put together like that and clamped tightly and then nailed, that compressed wood bounces back and ensures a watertight fit. And this is really pretty universal in Japanese boat building. That scale, by the way, is in shaku. That's not inches. Japanese boat builders don't work in the metric system. They use the traditional, it's called shaku sun bu. This also comes directly from China. And there are 2 different shaku scales. Boat builders use one called kane shaku. And I'm told that, traditional craftsmen throughout Japan reject the use of the metric system. And I'm told, in fact, that there's no such thing as a metric kimono, that the people who weave kimono fabric refuse to use modern measuring systems and still use shaku. So this is my teacher, Mr. Nasu. He turned 86 years old during the project. He's now 91, and just shows him making a plug with his hatchet. As I said, I had met him 3 times over the course of 15 years, and every time I asked him if he would take me on as an apprentice, and every time he said no. And finally, with the help of an intermediary, he suddenly made a reversal and said yes. But there was a caveat. He had become too old to do the physical labor, And so he said to me, I can lay down the lines, I can lay down the dimensions, I can show you the techniques, but you have to do all the physical work. Will you do it? And needless to say, I jumped at the chance. I should point out too that this project was funded quite generously by the Freeman Foundation of Honolulu, and with support from the Japanese Ministry of Culture and from George and Franny Hinteregger of Rhode Island. So 3 different sources of funding helped make this happen. And so we began by building the bottom. So you'll notice everything is edge nailed together. These are plugs, and there's an edge nail that's holding the adjacent planks. And we work like this. We work vertically, fitting each plank and then nailing it and slowly building this bottom up. In lieu of clamps, we used all these, what I call dogs or staples. And this is again something that seems to be most common with riverboat builders and not necessarily seaboat builders in Japan. And now that funny pattern. So we had to put this bottom is not quite complete. There was one more plank to go there. So when we started to put the first side plank on, we needed to set a bevel. And this bottom is 36 feet long. And so this pattern offered 3 different angles. And that's my label in Japanese, manaka, which means middle. So at the middle of the bottom, the edge needed that bevel cut on it to receive the side planks. So that's what that pattern is for. Each one has 3 marks, 3 slightly different angles, the bow, the stern, and the middle. And there's our bottom set up. We're braced overhead, very common in the Japanese boat shop. The shop itself, the building itself, is a very important tool. You notice the bracing from the floor, from the sides, at an angle. This is really crucial in the boat shop. My teacher added these boulders, these river boulders, to add some weight, and you notice we had bent the bottom. And the bottom is also slightly cupped across. And so the first planks are going on. And this is a very interesting tool, again, used universally by boat builders throughout Japan. We've got our plank braced, and we've bent it at an angle. And we've clamped it. You just see one of the dogs down there clamping it underneath the hull in place along the bevel. And this stick has a string with a weight on it. So that's a plumb bob and a vertical. And my teacher did it a little bit differently. There's a knot right there at 5 sun from the top, or 1/2 a shaku, basically the Japanese foot. And so every angle in the boat, he does not remember as degrees. He remembers it as the horizontal measure from the knot in the string to the stick, to a mark. He's got a little mark on the stick. And that's how we determined every angle. So he, from memory, told us the angle, told us the measurement, and we set the props and checked it until we got the proper angle. And that, again, that is how every angle is derived and checked by Japanese boat builders. This is a good shot because this shows the saw fitting. This is one of the Gifu boatmen from the tourist company. And by the way, 100,000 people, 100,000 tourists a year watch the cormorant fishing over a 6-month season in Gifu City. And it's really a very beautiful thing to watch. It's really quite amazing. But he's fitting our transom. This is a peaked transom. You see it's made of 2 pieces. Nasa-san is watching. Another volunteer is helping. But that's been set in place, and by running that saw through the joint, and he would also run that saw through the side joints, he'd eventually get a near watertight fit, or a very, very tight fit in that joint. And this is just planking the sides. Again, using those dogs. You see the mortises that have already been chiseled out. That's to receive those nails. So we're setting things up. These boat nails are simply to wedge the plank out so the two edges are flush. That's a quick way you can pound the nail in, push down on it, and just wedge those edges flush. And then we'll get ready, when that's all set, we'll get ready to drill and nail that plank. And here I am using the moji, again, hitting and twisting to get pilot a fastening hole to nail that plank into the transom. Couple of things here, this bar with this funny U-shaped bail, that's to help twist that plank. There was a prop that's above my head that you can't see that was pushing that to hold that twist. Lots of use of those dogs to hold everything together. And this is one of our scarf joints. Give you an idea of how that scarf looked. This boat was 42 feet long overall, and I mentioned that the bottom was 36 feet long. So every strake in the boat was composed of 3 planks, and the planks were joined with scarves like this. So there were 2 scarves in every single run of the planking in both the sides of the boat and the bottom of the boat. And you see here, you see all the plugs from all those edge nails. And one of the things, well, you'll get a better sense of this. You may be saying to yourself, what is this about edge nailing? Because of course in the West, any boat would have internal framing, and the nails would pass through the frames, through the planking and into the frames. But Japanese boats are essentially built without frames. Some boats have frames. Most of the structure of the boat is carried in the hull itself with very little framing inside. So the Japanese developed, and it comes from China. I've seen it in China. I've seen it in Korea. I've actually seen photos of it in Madagascar and Hong Kong of the planks instead being edge nailed. And this boat, by the way, had almost 1,000 nails. We actually did a count. I think the actual count was 963 nails. And there's my teacher just trimming off the deck supports. The Cormorant fishing boats have a deck at either end. And that foredeck is to carry this heavy iron davit, which is where that fire basket hung from. And this greenery here is Rose of Sharon. I'm sorry, I don't know the Latin name for that, but if you're a gardener, you might be familiar with Rose of Sharon. And every night the fishermen put that in because it has a natural oil that lubricates that hole, because the fisherman swings that davit back and forth. And the other deck on the boat is used as a rest for the birds. And here's our boat, and notice no frames. The only permanent frame in this boat is this central beam. This is actually dovetailed into the shear planks. Another one of our volunteers here is setting up and cutting just temporary beams. And when the boat's not in use, the fishermen will just drop these in at the gunwale just to help the boat hold its shape. But from a boat builder's perspective, this is a 42-foot long boat. All the planking is just a little over an inch thick, and there's just a single beam in the center of the boat. In short, it's completely ludicrous from a construction engineering standpoint. I defy you to find any naval architect to tell you that this would even work. But what Nasu-san told me was that the fishermen demand the lightest boat possible. And the river, sometimes they have to not portage the boat, but they have to kind of drag the boat over shallows. And so there's a real symbiosis in terms of design between the fishermen and the boat builders. And Nasu insisted this is what they want. So this is what they get. But these boats are not very long lived as a result. They generally wear out after about 10 years. And there's our finished boat. I'll also point out that every surface on this boat was planed by hand. And I say that because I pretty much planed all of it. Um, we used almost no power tools. We had a small circular saw, and we did have a handheld electric planer, but Nasu said every surface had to have a hand planed finish. There was no leaving an electric planer's marks on the boat. Very common in Japanese boat building, also in Japanese architecture. Cover up the end grain with copper plating. That was also done on the end grain on these beams. So the copper plate is wrapped around the end of the deck. And finally, launch day. Here's our boat in Gifu and on the Nagara River. The tradition was a new boat was capsized 3 times at launch. 3 is a very lucky number in Japan, and it's believed that a boat capsized this way on launch day will never capsize again. So here, this is the owner of the boat, and that's me in the middle. There's Mark and Satoshi, our other apprentice, and we're just about to take the boat over the first of three rolls. So I mentioned that cormorant fishing is done elsewhere in Japan. A year after the project, 2017, I built the cormorant boat in Gifu, and a year later, with an Asian Cultural Council grant from New York City, I got to go to Western Japan and China and visit almost all of the other places that that fish with cormorants in Japan. And so this is in the mountains of Hiroshima, the center of Hiroshima Prefecture. This photograph is about 100 years old, which is about as long as they have been doing this for tourists in this city, which is called Miyoshi. By the way, in Gifu City, they've been doing this as an entertainment for a good deal longer, maybe about 200 years. But this is just a remarkable, beautiful, long, skinny boat. I happened to visit off-season. The boats have been put away in storage, but you can see here, I've got my string out and I was measuring. This is the cormorant boat in Miyoshi. Slightly different? Well, yeah, actually a good deal different. But long, skinny riverboat, which is pretty typical of Japan. And this man is the last builder of the cormorant boats in Hiroshima. He told me when I'd met him a couple times before, and he told me he's soon going to retire. And I'm actually trying to raise funding right now to go back and build one of these boats with him, because he's never had an apprentice. Again, works from memory, no drawings, no documentation. And so, you know, the risk is obvious of what's going to happen when he retires. So I'd like to try to somehow go back and do something to try to preserve this. To a different kind of riverboat, very different kind. We're now on the Sea of Japan in Niigata Prefecture, and this is outside of Niigata City. This photo is either from the Shimanto River or the Agano River, 2 of the largest rivers in Japan, and these kind of flow across a massive fertile delta. So this is kind of slow water boat. I actually believe this photo is from the 1960s. I would say at first glance, you might say 1860s, but that's true of a lot of rural Japan, that you go back a couple of generations in rural Japan, and for all practical purposes, it could be like the 1860s. But we'll get a better look at these boats. There was actually a lot of dredging done with these boats. These were very all-purpose boats in this region. They were used for fishing, they were used for carrying rice harvest, and they were used for dredging. And these are specifically rice field boats. You see the rice paddies on either side and the canal in between. And this part of Japan, the rice harvest absolutely depended upon boats, because you can see there's no way a vehicle can get down this little path. And all this was done with boats, bringing in the harvest. But after World War II, with a lot of urging of the United States government, um, these canals were drained and roads were built, and this whole culture of boats and boat building just vanished overnight. So, so but in 2019, I had the opportunity to apprentice with the last boat builder in Nigata City and build one of these riverboats. He was 81 years old, and he had apprenticed with his father building wooden boats as a teenager, but by his late 20s, the era of wooden boats had disappeared, and he had to transition, and he made steel boats for the rest of his working career. But he remembered how to do it, and so we were in his huge steel fabrication shop. It was the kind of the strangest setting I've ever worked in, but we built one of these traditional boats. So this is the bottom, um, and that's his bevel gauge for the plank bevel on the side of the bottom, edge of the bottom. And that is Nina Noah. She is an administrator and graduate of the apprentice shop in Rockland, Maine. And she came with me as my apprentice on this project. And you see some of the beautiful cedar that we had to work with. And we were building the boat on this loft where I took this photograph from. And that's the main steel fabrication floor where she's working. And then we used a crane to bring those planks up to the boat site. And the joint between the way this boat is built, it has it rises up at the bow and stern, kind of not like a pram type transom, but you'll see in later photographs, but that is the joinery. That's the bow, that's the bow on the left, and that's the bottom plank on the right, just a kind of a beveled tongue and groove. And I sawed and cut that all by hand. And there's our boat. So if you look closely, you see the bottom, and you just see that plank, a separate plank with that tongue and groove joint just rises up at either end of the boat. And here we are wrapping the side planks around, big heavy props. We're propping them to their proper angle. The bark is still on the planking, a few modern clamps, but again, props from the floor. But this is, yeah, typical Japanese boat building. And there's our teacher, Mr. Nakagawa, and there is Nina. Now everything's propped in place. You see that prop with a wedge pressing against, pushing the side plank at the proper angle. So she is slightly wedging open the seam and then sawing, carefully running the full length of the boat, sawing, going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Several days of work for both Nina and I. There's the joint right there between the stern and the bottom, held together right now with dogs, but that's fitting the seam. There we go. Again, the wedges are in that seam, so this is just a shot, after one of us have traveled the length of the boat with the handsaw. Again, another shot of everything propped in place. And here, this is raw lacquer, urushi. And all of my teachers had talked about using this. I'm often asked if Japanese boat builders put anything in these seams to make them further watertight. And traditionally, this is what they did. Although I had never met a boat builder who actually still used it. This is actually extremely expensive today. And so when modern waterproof glues came into form, boat builders abandoned this and just use glue. But interestingly, they don't use the glue as an adhesive. They simply use it, they just say it's great sticky stuff that's waterproof. And it's cheap. It costs hardly anything compared to lacquer. But it was great that Mr. Nakagawa actually, for the first time, I got to see lacquer being used. So you buy it in these little paper tubs, and actually he told us this little paper tub, which is about, see if we see a picture of it. No, this little paper tub maybe holds a pint, and I think he told us this cost $150. Pretty sure. That's in my notes. And then he takes tempura flour. The Japanese call it panko, and I think that's what they call it if you buy it here in the US is panko. So it's just some kind of flour, and he mixes that with the lacquer until he gets this good bedding compound. So what we did not realize was that, well, I did know this, that urushi is extremely poisonous. It's a skin sensitizer. Urushi, you may know that urushiol is, another word for poison ivy. It's the kind of the root name of those poisonous plants. And Nakagawa was really cavalier using it. You see he's got a glove on one hand, and that's just a loose weave cotton glove. And you see he's working it with his bare hands with his other hand. Well, it turns out in Japan, if you're exposed to lacquer, you develop an immunity to it. And he made a brief caution to Nina and I, and we didn't think much of it. And I got a little speck of lacquer on my fingertip, and about a week later, I'd broken out my arms, my stomach, and poor Nina, really, it took 3 weeks for this to disappear for Nina. This is really, really powerful poison, and just by, kind of by accident, we stepped in it. So there's our boat turned over, getting ready to trim off the excess. And Nina's using the power plane. So Nakagawa's using his adze and roughing it for Nina on this side, and then she's using the power plane, and then, like the previous builder, Nakagawa insisted all the final work on the boat be done with a hand plane. A bit of caulking Nakagawa did. We caulked the joints in the bottom, and this is, unlike in the West where we use cotton fiber, in Japan they use the inner bark of the cypress tree. And there's a couple of caulking irons and a metal hammer and this loosely woven thing. And I know of only one source of this material today in Japan. So this is a problem with saving the craft as well, that various crafts that support the craft are disappearing. So this is becoming a very, very rare item. And as I mentioned, hand planing, Nina did the entire inside of the boat with a couple of different hand planes. And, this is a lot of explaining. This is really interesting though. To draw the shear, so to draw this curved line on the top edge of the boat, Mr. Nakagawa did something I had never seen before. We pinned a string, there it is, and it runs the full length of the boat, a little higher than the transom on the other side of the boat. He is standing at one spot, being very careful not to move his head, and he is sighting across the string to a point on the hull and directing me to make a mark. So this is called a planar shear. Think of a cone, think of the sides of the boat as sections of a cone, And with his eyes and my help and the string and the pen, we are marking a perfectly flat plane at an angle cutting across that conic section. I don't need to say anything more, do I? I'm happy to follow up in my email. This is really interesting. And this is actually a well-known thing in naval architecture. Um, it could be a whole nother talk, and so we'll move on. But do give us your email so I can include some information on this. Write that down. And by the way, to any boat builders out there, this is an awesome way to set the shear on your boat. This is a beam that traps the ends of the planks at either end of the boat. And there you see it. It kind of locks the ends of the side planks, and then it's bolted to the bottom. There we are. We're planing now. I'm planing the outside of the boat. And there's the finished boat. Nina, myself, and this is Ben Meter, the map maker I referenced at the start of the program. Ben came with us as a documentarian, shooting video and doing a lot of other high-tech cool things to help us document the boat. And again, as part of the email I'll send you links to some really, really neat short videos he made and produced on this project. Really well worth seeing. So there we are at launch. So, and if you're wondering about why it says BND carved into the side of the boat, Nakagawa decided that it had to say Ben Nina Douglas on the side of the boat. So and these are some of the big steel barges that Nakagawa, these are dredging barges, still dredging sand in that river in Japan. And those are the boats that he spent his career building. So the Japanese riverboat, this boat that we just looked at, this is the boat I'll be teaching in the workshop at the Carpenter's Boat Shop next July. So please sign up. We'd love to have you. We'd love to build this with a group of students. I have been teaching this in the US for a few years. This is one of my classes at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont. This is actually a bigger version. This is a 27-foot riverboat that we built in their winter term program. And because it's winter term and it's Vermont, we have to launch it in the college swimming pool. So that's what we do. I've taught 4 times at Middlebury. Here's one of my other Middlebury classes. They're chiseling nail holes to meet those mortises for the edge nailing. Planing by hand. And then a launch ceremony again at Middlebury. This is another type of riverboat, and get a look at it here. This is from the Kyoto area, this design, from the Hozu River. And this is another Ayu fishing boat. But this would be a one-person, a commercial fisherman, one man going out, one man or woman going out with a net fishing for Ayu. This is their style of fishing boat. And then this again is the boat from Nigata, the 21-foot riverboat. This is my class at Bates College, where we built 2 of them, and you see the forest of props carrying them out. Launch day, Bates College does their short term at the end of the school year, so much nicer weather, and there's a pond conveniently located in the center of campus. We do a traditional Shinto launching ceremony and then launch the boats. I'll say that my college class is really less about boat building in my mind, and it's really more about Japanese apprentice pedagogy. I try as much as I can to have a completely silent classroom. Most of my teachers demanded that we work together in complete silence. And they refused, more or less refused, to do any explaining or nor answer any of my questions. In the Japanese apprentice system, the apprentice is expected to learn through observation. And the first thing that might pop into your mind is the inefficiency of that. But what I like to say is Japanese apprentice learning is a values-based education. And so the apprentice, and myself included, even with all my experience, the first tool the apprentice is handed is the broom. And that was true in almost all of my apprenticeships. I swept at the outset. And yet, while sweeping, it's expected that the apprentice is watching the master. Because when the master, 1 week in, 2 weeks in, at whatever point, hands the tool to the apprentice and says, work, the work has to be done perfectly, or you go back to sweeping. And so I have really found that to be, so it's really a values-based education. It's not about efficiently training the apprentice. It is first, the apprentice must first develop the proper values. Otherwise, it's considered a waste of time to teach them anything. So what are those values? Patience, perseverance, obedience, and also, in a very real way, guile. Because in Japan, in the Japanese tradition, if you weren't directly related to your master wasn't your father or your mother or an uncle, you weren't taught everything because you potentially represented competition. And most of my teachers shared stories with me about how they were forced to steal their master's secrets. And in a funny way, they saw it as really their final graduation lesson. Could they manage to figure out everything their master knew? So so there's a lot of pressure in this education system, but that's part of it too. Can you deal with that pressure, and can you thrive and succeed? And so that's a long-winded way of saying I'm trying to do this in my college classes, and I'm happy to report my students are initially terrified the first day when I tell them there'll be no speaking, and by the end of the course they really come to embrace it. So it's been a really rewarding, very interesting, lots of fun. And that's the Bates launch. Whoops. And we got a little publicity in Japan, and the headline there says, building a riverboat totally kuru, meaning cool. So, I've been handed a note. You can ask if folks have questions to put them in the chat box and answer. Okay. So a few more different riverboats. This is, again, that Hozu River that flows into Kyoto. And this is a tourist boat. You can see the 3 boatmen guiding this boat through the rapids, and then our gang of kimono-wearing passengers. And this company is still in business. They still use boats like this. Sadly, they're made of fiberglass, so they're this exact style and size. And this company claims, and I want to send you the link in my email to their website, this company claims they have been taking tourists down this river for 400 years. And it's a 16-kilometer trip, takes about 90 minutes. It is absolutely fantastic. When they get to Kyoto, you get out of the boat and a big crane truck comes over, picks up the boat and drives it back upriver. in the old days, when these guys were doing it, they pulled these boats 16 kilometers back up this river. So next time you're at work and think you have it hard. Also, this river was famous for its log rafts. This is how lumber got to Kyoto. And this is how, when you go to Kyoto and all the magnificent temples and houses and amazing architecture of Kyoto, this is where the wood came from, down the Hozu River. And as a credit, in credit to the current boatmen, boat persons, I'm sorry, there is not yet a woman working for the company as a boatman, I'm sorry to say, a Sendo-san. But they wanted, the Sendo-san in this company wanted to preserve this tradition and actually found two elderly men who were part of the final log drives down this river right after World War II. And they apprenticed with these two men in their 80s, and they now build log rafts and only occasionally take them down the river because it's so dangerous. But they do these as public events. And these rafts are tied together with the traditional vines, and that's a tiller. You actually, the first section of the raft articulates, and that's what this person is doing, steering it. It's like a big snake going down the river. So a great bit of documentation of traditional crafts. And what the heck, it's a freshwater boat, so I put it in the slideshow. This is another river tourist boat in Nagano Prefecture. Again, you'll see the similarities with the Cormorant boat, that peaked transom at one end, not at the other end, the flat bottom, and building up the sides. So the use of the dogs and some modern clamps. So the boat builders here keep this alive. Although one day that I was there, I worked with these men for a couple of weeks. One day I was there, this elderly man walked in and he stood to the back and didn't say anything. And I wondered who he was. And then I had this idea in my head who he might be. And sure enough, this apprentice was looking kind of confused. And the old man jumped in and began to, help him. And it turned out this was the elderly retired master. And he likes to stop by. And this is his apprentice, who is now the current head boat builder. And these are the younger apprentices. So the old master just can't keep away. But these boats are built for a commercial tourist company with no drawings whatsoever. This man knows them, this man knows them, and they use these patterns, and that's it. And they build boats like this with just that. That's my notebook. That's not their notebook. So I'm recording all the dimensions, all the angles, tracing those patterns. I bring a big roll of paper with me so I can trace patterns and just try to record everything that I possibly can. That's the other transom. That's the bow transom. There's the bow. And here's another tour company, very different style of boat. I'm actually about to sign a contract to build some new boats for this company because all their boat builders, they're either too old to work or they've passed away. So this is a project waiting for me when Japan opens up after COVID. And right now this company, it's struggling. They have just 6 tour boats, and back in the 1960s, they had 50. So that speaks to the decline of rural Japan, where the population has basically been falling since the end of World War II. That's another socioeconomic issue, a big story. But what an amazing! These are from the exact same spot. We're coming to the end here. Another river in Japan. This is the Kumano River. Most of Japan's rivers are white water, and by looking at the background, you can understand why. Japanese rivers, there ain't no Mississippi. They are not very long because it's not that far from the mountains to the sea. So they tend to flow very quickly. Um, and this is a really, really beautiful riverboat. Again, this is a traditional riverboat on the Kumano River. There are still a few of these used for fishing, but this is a tour boat and real nice tour. This man was an engineer, and when the local boat builder died, he figured out how to build the boats, and because the tour company needed a source of boats, and so he went into business. He quit. He retired. He quit his job as an engineer. He's become a full-time boat builder, but he's deviated from the traditional Japanese method. And being an engineer, he put his mind to it, and he built these steel molds, and so very, very different. This steel platform to build on. So very innovative, but a bit divorced from the tradition. I want to show you this because this picture really shows that the way that bow curves up. And that's necessary in that fast-moving whitewater river so that you don't bury the bow of the boat. Otherwise, you'd submarine it, a more conventional boat. And a shot on that same river of the sailing boats, the sailing vessels. And traditional Japanese sails are made with vertical panels, loosely woven together, so that when the wind picks up, they just open up and automatically spill the wind. Anybody who's ever sailed a square rig ship knows that it's hard to reef a square sail. And so that's true of these sails, these rectangular sails, but that's the reefing method. Just let the panels spread apart, spill the wind. I think these are the final boats. This is from the Shimanto River. This is the only major river in Japan that's undammed. And this is the clearest water I've ever seen in my life. This is yet another tour business that'll take you down through these little rapids here. But the water is absolutely crystal clear. The Shimanto, this is a very, very rural part of Japan. And so it's been spared any industrial development, but it's also really depopulated. I traveled on this river in 2018 because there were 3 boat builders still living on this river. These are wooden frames with a glass panel for fishing. So in the old days, you stuck your head, stuck your face, you jumped out of your boat with your sight box and your spear, and you fished. And this is one of the boat builders. And interestingly, he had done in retirement, he had done some sketches of the various boats that he built. He had this amazing box of patterns, each one for a different boat. I only had an hour to spend with him, and oh my God, I hope I can get back before it's too late and really interview him. Another shot of some riverboats. This is in Hiroshima. So the city of Hiroshima, this is within the city limits of Hiroshima. But again, you see these are bigger boats. So in Japan, you blow upriver and then you come back down with the current of the river. And that is my last picture. So this is my book, Japanese Wooden Boat Building. It is about my first 5 apprenticeships, as well as a chapter on Japan's last traditional shipwright. You can purchase it from me at my website. And of course, if you get my email, I'm going to shill for this, right? So I won't beat you over the head about this any longer. But I want to thank you, and thank you for your interest. And now I am eager to take any questions. So how do we do that? What do I do? What do I do mute-wise?
I think if folks put questions in the chat box.
Okay.
Can you read your chat box?
Okay, sorry.
Nope,
So I have got to stop the screen. Sorry, folks. here we are. Now I gotta find the chat. Okay, 16 chats. So I guess I'll go to the top. Nice compliment. There's no sound. Thank you very much, and we apologize for that. I'm looking for the first question. Love your videos. Okay. Somebody said they love my book. We can trust him, him or her. All right. Follow-up's good. Oh, okay. Somebody wants to meet me. Good for you. Okay, your photos show wide planks, and I can imagine that finding suitable materials is a growing challenge in Japan as well as the US. Um, are there initiatives to adapt to alternative materials other than the caulking you mentioned? So other than what I said about using modern waterproof glue, my teachers were very conservative, and they really were not that interested in innovation. Now, it's a great question. As far as materials, I need to find that wide planking material. In order to build in the Japanese tradition, I need wide planks. So living here in New England and teaching at Middlebury and Bates and the Carpenter's Boat Shop, the boats are built of pine. That is the only species I can get reasonably um, that's anywhere near as wide as Japanese cedar. In Japan, there is no shortage. Japan has some of the most incredible old growth forests I've ever seen. And I used to live in the Pacific Northwest. So there's no trouble in Japan finding suitable boat building materials, as long as you can find the logger and the mill and so on. But here in the US, yeah, it would be a bit of a challenge. If I think Southern Cypress would be an excellent choice. That's a great boat building material, and you can get that in the kind of sizes like Japanese cedar. Um, if you were out west, I taught this workshop out in the state of Washington in Port Townsend, and we use ponderosa pine. And again, we could get that really wide planks. So so other than that, could you build these boats out of plywood? I mean, that's one of the first things I thought of when I went to Japan. These boats are all hard chine, wide flat panels. These would be perfect for plywood construction. Just don't say that to a Japanese boat builder. Um, that would not solicit a positive response. But that's entirely a possibility to use plywood. Is there interest among the younger generation in Japan? Um, and that's a great question. Do you anticipate aspiring Japanese boat builders getting their training in New England? I am actually working with the apprentice shop on the idea of a boat building exchange program with Japan. That's why I took Nina in 2019, so she could experience this firsthand. And we are, COVID immediately shut down any hope of it. Um, I, I'm sorry to say that the apprentice system cannot save the craft. There are not enough practitioners left, and it just wouldn't happen. I think the only way to save the craft is a boat building school. And what I'd like to do at least is perhaps create like a satellite school in Japan with under the apprentice shop, and solicit the funding because they're the nonprofit, and try to create a program. And I don't care where the students come from, if Europe, America, Australia, or Japan. But I think if we got something started, I think that the younger generation in Japan is actually really hungry to learn these traditional skills. That too is another long socioeconomic subject, but I do think it's possible. Somebody asked why Japanese boat building. I guess they're sort of asking that, how did I get involved? Very quickly, my college roommate was from Hiroshima. For 10 years after we graduated from college, he begged me to visit Japan. By the time I finally went, I had entered this craft. I was the museum boat builder at the Maritime Museum in San Francisco, and so I was building traditional boats and teaching traditional boat building and curating traditional boats. And I went to Japan, and in the course of traveling around, I met some boat builders, and it was clear the practitioners were all elderly. They had no apprentices, and this amazing, amazing craft was clearly on the brink of disappearing. And one of the boat builders I met that first trip, he built the tub boats, those barrel boats that I showed at the outset of the slideshow. Um, he asked me to be his student, and once I did that, I was absolutely hooked. So that's why Japanese boat building, a complete accident. Several riverboats have lines, yes, similar to the bateau, absolutely. Lots of, I've taught some workshops at Lowell's Boat Shop in Amesbury, Mass, which is dedicated to the dory, which is a derivative of the bateau. And I've talked to Graham McKay, the director there, about building a Japanese boat because there's so many similarities between dory building and Japanese boat building. And if you go to Lowell's, what do you find out? They didn't have plans, they just had patterns, they had funny little charts of their measurements. You know, right down through every level of the craft, you see the similarities. So yeah, that's a great observation. Target moisture content. In Japan, the wood is air dried for 1 year. And you know something? I've never actually measured the moisture content. It's just that every boat builder just says you let the cedar air dry for 1 year. So Japan's a very humid place. I suspect that's probably 15 to 20%. Are you making the tools needed for doing the boat building in the US? I have now a large collection of Japanese boat building tools. Um, the family of my Tokyo teacher who passed away 2 years ago, they actually just gave me his tools, and other teachers have given me their tools. Um, so I have a lot of tools. The tools are still available. They can be made to order in Japan, and so I have sources for all the boat building tools. So, um, so I have what I need here, and they are available. If you need to get them, they can be had. Do you teach using the same Japanese methods, or do you create drawings? So from a researcher's standpoint, yes, I create drawings because that's the documentation that ultimately can preserve the design. And I can share with you some of those drawings or an example of those drawings. Um, uh, Sorry, I'm taking notes for that magic email. Um, But when I teach, no, when I teach, I do it, I lay out the dimensions exactly the way my teachers do, and I try to teach in the style and spirit that my teachers used, which is essentially say nothing, just work. And so that's a very short answer to a very big question. And I think that may be all the questions, unless somebody flies one in. Oop, do you have a full-time apprentice? I do not. But I have tried to involve apprentices as much as possible. I've I've now taught about a dozen people in Japan. I brought a young woman from Maine with me to Iwate when we built that inshore fishing boat. Brought Mark Bauer to Gifu for the Cormorant boat. So I'm trying to include people as much as possible. What is the lightest riverboat you're aware of, and how much does it weigh? Well, I can tell you that the 42-foot Cormorant fishing boat weighed 800 pounds, because that's what the crane operator told us when he picked it up to take it to the river. The lightest riverboat, I'm thinking of this beautiful little 14-foot one that boat builder I showed you with that box of patterns on the Shimanto River. And I have the dimensions and lines of that boat. So this questioner may want to get in touch with me. It would be a great boat to build out of plywood. Um, that riverboat probably weighed, 100 pounds, 14 footer, it's my guess. The sawing of the joints between the planks is very interesting. Can you speak about that a bit? Uh, um, oh boy, maybe better left to my email. So I'm going to, what can I say? I'll say a few things until Alicia waves at me to shut me up, or we get another question. Um, the technique has a couple of different names. The most common is suriawase. Suru is the verb to rub. Awaseru is the verb to put together. So a good English definition would be reconcile. So again, woodworkers are aware of that technique, that if two pieces of wood don't fit, you kind of clamp them together, hold them together, run a saw in between them, and that saw cuts a parallel-sided curve. So you've taken the high spots off. Then you can knock them together tight again and run the saw through again, getting the next high spots off. And so that's how it's done. And progressively the fit gets better and better and better. Japanese boat builders use a couple of grades of saw, the fineness of the teeth, and go to a finer and finer tooth set each time. They use a special handsaw unique to boat building for that. But I think I'll leave the rest of that explanation to this email, which is growing, is going to be pages and pages long. So
I love it.
Alicia loves it, and maybe that's where we should wrap it up.
Sounds wonderful.
It looks like we've gone over time. I want to thank you all so much for your interest and your patience, and I will be in touch. I'm teaching a workshop at the Apprentice Shop this weekend on making a Japanese hand plane. So I'm going to be busy till I get that done. So probably sometime next week you'll get your email, but feel free to reach out with any questions. And of course, every question is answered in my book. I swore I wouldn't do that anymore. But thank you again. And I hope we get to meet someday, every single one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I hope to see you all soon.